is up? Sexy people. It is Dave. It is Duncan back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Trailblazing rock visionaries Thrice. The band's new album Horizons West will be released on October 3rd via Epitaph Records. Serving as a companion to 2021's Horizon East, the new full-length album continues Thrice's bold sonic exploration and philosophical depth while standing firmly as its own statement. Dustin Kensrue explains that this is the first time we lean into something that felt like a direct continuation, like a sequel to a previous album. A lot of this record is about parsing reality. We're constantly being influenced by algorithms, by fear, by our own social echo chambers. Horizons West tries to pull the curtain back on some of that. We are always just followed our curiosity wherever it leads. We want to keep growing, exploring, and making something that feels honest to who we are right now. Horizons West was produced and engineered by the band at Newgrass Studios, with mixing and additional production by Scott Evans, mastering by Matthew J. Barnhart, both of whom worked on Thrice's The Artist in the Ambulance Revisited album from 2023. This release continues the band's long-standing DIY ethos and adventurous spirit. So, Thrice. Yeah, weirdly, we've never reviewed a Thrice album for this website or the previous one. Although we have been fans of the band for quite some time. Weirdly.
20 years.
About 20 years, yeah. I think, probably. Try to think what album I got into them on.
It was Illusion of Safety that I remember. I think that may have been the first one I got.
Right.
Which is what? Just early 2000s, so.
Right, I'd probably be about. Was that Visu? I'm trying to think I was Visu, maybe. Or was it the Alchemy Index, maybe? Oh, that'd probably be after. Possibly. Anyway. But it's been a while, and it's been a while.
Yes.
But I think to say like they've changed quite a bit since the early days. That kind of like the raw kind of angsty Thrice on like the Artist in the Ambulance. It's kind of rare to hear that now on their like most recent albums. I actually really liked Palms, the one did in 2018. That was a really good album. And then Horizons East, which was the last album, it was okay. I can't say it was one I've come back to all that much, if I'm honest. A little bit subdued, maybe. Like I like the sound of it, if you know what I mean. Like it's got quite a nice, like airy kind of quality to it. But maybe the songs were maybe just not as memorable as I've heard from Thrice in the past. Some of the kind of experimental stuff, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't like top tier Thrice either, in my opinion. Did not know it was going to be continued into another release.
I get the feeling the band didn't know either.
Yeah, I do. But I quite like the idea. I quite like the concept of it. Doing another side to it or a continuation of it. What can we say about this album? It does kind of feel like this album could be the other side to that album. There is a kind of like a kind of contrasting kind of tone shift that does like push towards something slightly bigger, a little bit darker, a little bit harsher in delivery as well than that album. And I was thinking about this today. I suppose if you dig into like the album titles, they could suggest that maybe Horizons East is maybe alluding to like sun rising in the east, and then Horizons West could be like the sun setting on the west horizon. So kind of like a light and dark type thing. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. I have no idea. But the album does open with a track called Blackout. So, I'm saying. And it is a very kind of cinematic kind of opening to the album. But, it's got all these kind of like ethereal kind of electronics kind of woven in, bits of percussion. And then Dustin's voice, all kind of smoky and sexy, comes in, and that track, it just kind of guides you through this kind of like landscape of something that feels quite intimate, but also quite expansive at the same time. And then as it kind of gradually builds towards the end of the track, it builds up and kind of erupts into something but kind of heavier, and you feel things like, okay, we're starting to kind of get cooking now. And then Nash kicks in, which is I think that was the first single, and I'm sure that's the first one I heard from the album, and it was one I was like, oh, okay, this could be interesting to review this one. Much heavier than the material on like Horizons East, but definitely like little moments that kind of almost did like a kind of throwback or a callback to like earlier Thrice. I could definitely hear a bit of like Alchemy Index in there, or Visu as well. It's a bit more metallic, and the vocals are also kind of pushed into a more like aggressive kind of place. Dustin's actually like kind of screaming on the track. But what I also like was there's this kind of like post-punk kind of electro rock kind of pulse thing, like running through it as well. So it kind of stops it from being like a complete like nostalgia trip as well. There's like newer Thrice character in there as well, so it's like a kind of blend of like kind of old and new, which I thought was really cool. And to be honest, it's not the only time they do that on this release. There is a lot of those kind of like callbacks to early Thrice, especially around that kind of Alchemy Index, Visu kind of period, where there is those kind of slower, heavy parts that have got a bit of kind of darker aggression kind of seeping through. Crooked Shadows has a heap of that as well. But then there's huge sections on this that lean into that more kind of expansive, kind of experimental side of the band that you'll hear on like bits of like Beggars or kind of Major Minor, that kind of era. Tracks Albatross was one that had a bit of that kind of Beggars kind of sound, but it's also mixed with like the newer kind of Palms kind of side as well, which was quite hooky as well, which I liked. So you get a real like mix of styles on this release. It's got a really cool balance of like the usual kind of like indie and alternative and like post-rock kind of textures, but there are these moments of like kind of more kind of rhythmic kind of complexity, I suppose, and a bit more aggression. So it's covering a kind of wide spectrum musically and vocally. But even though they are kind of like, adding these little kind of nuggets of like previous older Thrice and different styles, it's shaped very well into something that feels very kind of unified. That the album does have really good like connective moments, I suppose, between the tracks. So you never really feel like, or I never really felt really kind of like detached from it. And it's kind of like immersive in a way. They do create a lot of like cinematic kind of textures, and the guitar work that adds that kind of like feeling of depth and a bit of tension as well. But you never kind of get lost in it either. The tracks feel kind of well constructed, and you've got the like verse chorus type thing happening as well, but the tracks also feel individual enough that you can tell where you are on the album, partially because of the way they've ordered the album. You don't tend to get like two tracks back to back that sound too alike, but also the vocal from Dustin Kentrew as well. His performances on this is great. I think this is a much more memorable vocal performance than the previous album. I feel like the hooks are bigger on this, more prominent, but also the stuff where it gets a little bit more kind of mysterious, like on the Dark Glow, for example, where he's like really playing with like these dynamics and showing a bit more of a kind of intimate side, and that stuff can be just as captivating as those kind of hook laden moments on the album. But you can say the same thing musically. I think these tracks have a lot of contrast, a lot of kind of peaks and valleys throughout. They never like follow the exact same formula either. We got a stream of this album, which I never love, but what I did highlight for me was that each track here is very different kind of dynamically. On the stream of the album, you could see like each track's kind of
wave file, the
kind of sound wave of it, the shape of it and stuff, and none of them are the same. Like like they're not just like blocks of sound. They've got a lot of kind of dips and like crescendos and stuff like that. So it is an album that doesn't really get kind of dull, like musically or vocally. There's a lot of kind of back and forth and light and shade throughout this album, which is pretty good. Production wise, this is ace. Like, I really like the production on this. It's got a really kind of lush atmosphere, lots of space and texture, but as I mentioned, it's very cinematic in places. Never lacks that kind of like depth or power either. There's some really nice use of kind of synths just to keep the album sounding really full and warm, but also adds a kind of nice emotional touch to it as well. Drums have got a really good kick to them. I really enjoyed that. It's not a huge jump away from the Horizons East production, so you've still got that kind of like the connection between the two, but it's not identical either. There's enough kind of tweaks being made that gives the album its own personality. I really enjoyed this. I don't know. It didn't go exactly as I expected. After hearing like Nash and Albatross, those were kind of like typical single tracks, and they came with those like the big vocal hooks, the big choruses. So when I heard the album, I was like, "Oh right, okay." It took me a couple of listens to kind of to fully get into it and appreciate like the kind of nuance and all the kind of contrast that it had to offer. It's definitely not a full album of Nashes and Albatrosses, but like as I said before, like Thrice, like it wouldn't be a Thrice album without that like experimentation and, you know, them trying to expand that kind of color palette. So I think like my only kind of small kind of complaint on this one is I feel like the album does maybe kind of tail off a little bit towards the end. The last few tracks, I don't think they were quite, for me anyway, quite as strong. I wasn't completely sold on the ending. I do think the kind of first part of the album is much stronger than the end. But I do still feel that this is a stronger album compared to Horizons East. So another really good act. They're very consistent, this band. Like, they very rarely kind of put out something of a kind of mediocre quality. And this is another kind of great album to add to their kind of back catalogue. But yourself, what'd you make of this?
Yeah, this is really good. I think the first thing that really captured my attention was the production. I think the production's really is warm and inviting. You know, like everything is nice and crystal clear, but handled in such a way that the album makes really good use of space. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there feels like depth here, and when there's depth here, you can either choose to fill it with things like synths or electronic sims, which they do for sure, or kind of more kind of pomp and circumstance around things to add a little bit of gravitas, like filmic score stuff specifically on the track. But also, like, I think they also are really good at not necessarily filling space. Undertow's a great example of that, which is a track that starts off with essentially minimalist drums for predominantly most of what we would class as the verse. But then when the chorus kicks in, the chorus is not overpowered, even though you have a full drum section, you know, your big power chords and your kind of lead played guitar in the background and synths and vocals. The danger of kind of putting those two things together is it could overwhelm a track, and actually it doesn't. The balance is pristine. I think that's kind of where Thrice this far in their career have really kind of shown the maturity that you kind of want a band that's been carving this trajectory out for as long as they have to have that, like, have that in the tank of knowing when to put the foot down, knowing when to take it off the pedal. And they really, really, really do it well here. And like you mentioned about the kind of peaks and valleys of the album, to me it was a very interesting listen, because I never got two tracks side by side that felt like they were telling me the same story. If anything, I think the way they balanced them around was actually, it was more inviting for me. You're right when you, like, Albatross sounded like a less Scottish Biffy Clyro. Like, there's just something about that chorus that I could imagine it kind of morphing into Biffy Clyro style vocals with a kind of overtly Scottish accent. It's a huge kind of track. I imagine, you know, like a home run live. I can imagine you get everyone involved with that. And to me, it was like, That's what I was actually more expecting. I know you were saying like you'd heard Nash and you were kind of expecting a little bit more of that. I was actually expecting a lot more albatrosses on this one, and they don't do that, which could come across as frustrating on the first couple of listens. But by listen 4, I'd kind of settled into a real feel of, right, this is a band been around for a long time now. They're not just going to give you an album of kind of screamy, posty-punky aggro stuff. It wouldn't feel genuine to them. It would also be like a huge departure from what they were doing. But like you mentioned, it feels like they are nodding at their back catalogue without trying to copy their back catalogue and trying to continue moving their sound forward without taking a massive leap away from what they've done. So in a lot of ways, kind of, it's not a safe album by any stretch of imagination, but being a little bit safer in the way that they've judged what the album needs to sound like, to me, actually paid off. I really like the close of this album. I think like when you move from Distant Suns, especially into Vesper Light, which is a really, really, really good closer, and it's the longest track in this album by over a minute, I think, because the other thing I mentioned is that like most of the tracks here are single length. You know, the average length of most of the tracks here is about 3.5 minutes to 3 3/4. So Vesper Light to me kind of felt like a really nice culmination of the different movements in the album. Is it going out in a bang? Absolutely not. It kind of does slowly bring you down. Those last 3 tracks are designed to bring the album down from some of the higher moments on it. So yeah, I can see to an extent the criticism being that those like highlight moments are few and far between, and they do happen in the first half of the album. But if they are approaching it conceptually like you've kind of hypothesized as the sun setting, that would make sense if that is indeed what they're planning on doing. True. If they're not, then we're just making assumptions still. And like everyone's on their A game here. I love the voice. See, that's a voice that's just been grown into, you know what I mean? It's got a soft quality to it, but also has a lot of grit and a lot of kind of husk behind it, which really, really, really kind of allows them to, very similar to like changing different pedals or, you know, like picking different sims on a keyboard. It allows him to be very diverse in how he deploys it, and he uses it very, very well. Some of the backing vocals on this are absolutely incredible as well, and the quieter moments, the kind of harmonies are great. So yeah, I mean, I think this is once again, they're 20 plus years into their career now. And they're still, like you say, they've never really put a foot wrong. Is this the most exciting Thrice album you'll ever hear? No, I would also probably argue this far into their career, you're not going to get that. But it's not a paint by numbers Thrice album either, which is kind of cool. So I think if you've been a long time fan of this band, there's enough here to kind of keep you guessing, whilst enough here to keep you comforted, which is a hard balance to do. Like they're not like Avenged Sevenfold in that last album, basically saying this album will sound nothing like anything we've done before, and their fans are confused as to how they should feel about that. If you're a Thrice fan, you're going to be happy here. A lot of the stuff here, and this is what I was saying, a lot of the stuff here actually would sit great amongst like a catalogue of live songs. So, you know, they're not going to play the album in full, but what they're going to pick from here is going to sit very, very, very nice on a live set and work well with other stuff they've got. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I had too much... I don't know if I had too much in the bag on this one either coming in, where I was like, there's better deliver. Well, there is that kind of thing where like bands become so accustomed to releasing quality that you just, it's an assumption that you're going to get a good album. It's just how great it's going to be. And I think this lands somewhere between that good and great, I think, for me.
Okay. Scores for the new Thrice album. I mean, this is like solid. I enjoyed my time with this. There are some huge moments on here that will definitely get stuck in your head afterwards, but then there's also moments on here that are just kind of more kind of introspective and immersive, which I really liked. Is it up there next to like their more noteworthy releases? I don't know. Like off the top of my head, I could definitely put like 3 or 4 Thrice albums above this personally, but still, if you're a Thrice fan, then I don't think there's any way you dislike this album, to be honest. There's a lot of like kind of old kind of Thrice moments on here, which I don't know if it's to do with they did Horizons East, then they did the revisited version of that in Ambulance. I don't know if them going back to that old materials maybe influenced that. I don't know.
Sometimes you find that bands get put in a headspace just from playing things they haven't played, deep cuts that I haven't played in a while. It just makes them look at what they want to do next in a different way.
Yeah. All that being said, it's a very good quality album. I'm going to go 4 out of 5 on this one. What are you thinking yourself?
I am right there with you. It's a 4 out of 5 for me.
Nice. So Thrice, brand new album Horizons West, out on Epitaph on October 3rd. Links to the band below. Check it out, have a listen, see what you think. I'm happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is the review. Thanks for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye everyone.
Days are